Today, we're diving into a technology that has a pretty wild range of reported effects. I'm talking softer swimming pool water, better tasting coffee, and even cleaner industrial systems. It's called grander water revitalization, and in this explainer, we're going to break down what it is and the science behind the phenomenon. The story here often starts with these experiences that are just really hard to ignore. Take this one from the hotel industry. Thomas Hediger at the Hotel Edelweiss says, "The water in our swimming pool is soft and pleasant. Guests feel it too. They constantly tell us how nice the water is." And that's not just some tiny improvement. It's something guests are actually stopping to talk about. And it doesn't stop with hotels. Let's jump over to food production. Master baker Eric Felber reports that the dough became more elastic and easier to work with. And millers have apparently seen similar things, noticing that even really hard, dry grain soaks up this revitalized water way more effectively. For them, that's a huge deal in their process. But this is where the claims get really dramatic, in industrial settings. Listen to this from Andreas Kutscher at Hirschmann Automotive, a high-tech manufacturer. "Since installing grander water revitalization, we have been able to completely dispense with all chemicals." Just think about that for a second. Going from a system that needs constant chemical treatment to one that doesn't, that is a massive operational game changer. So let's take a step back. We've got happy hotel guests, better baking bread, and chemical-free factories. What in the world connects all of these? What even is this technology, and how on earth is it supposed to work? That's the core mystery we're going to unpack right now. To get to the bottom of the how, we've got to start with the who. So let's take a look at the vision of the inventor, Johann Grander. At the very heart of this technology is a pretty radical idea. Johann Grander believed that water is a living system in permanent dialogue with its environment and capable of transmitting information. So he didn't see water as just a chemical compound, H2O. He saw it as a medium that could carry and transfer a blueprint, an order, almost like a language. And you have to understand, that perspective didn't come from a laboratory. Grander wasn't a scientist in a white coat. The source material calls him a visionary naturalist from the mountains of Tyrol. He spent his life just observing water in nature, and his technology is based on those observations, not on traditional lab work. Okay, so how is this information transfer supposed to work? Well, it's a non-contact process, which is the wild part. First, the Grander devices are filled with something called information water, water that has a very stable, highly ordered structure. Second, your regular tap water flows past these chambers, and get this, it never actually touches the information water. And third, the stable structure is somehow transferred, imprinting a new order onto your tap water, revitalizing it. For a long time, that philosophical explanation was pretty much the whole story. But then, researchers looking into the technology stumbled onto a really curious biological phenomenon, and this led to what they called the mystery of the pinpoints. So the first people who really tried to scientifically measure what was going on, they didn't start with physics or chemistry. Nope. They looked at microbiology, because something very strange was happening to the bacteria in the water. And the change was pretty stark. On the left, you see how bacteria from normal water form these large, kind of wild colonies. But on the right, bacteria from the revitalized water form these teeny tiny pinpoints. And these little guys act totally different. They become incredibly efficient at breaking down nutrients. Basically, they turn into a microscopic cleaning crew that purifies the water at an incredible speed. So, scientists needed a way to measure this cleaning effect. They used something called assimilable organic carbon, or AOC. To put it simply, think of AOC as the all-you-can-eat buffet for bacteria in the water. It's the food that lets them grow and multiply. And this is where it gets really interesting. Check out this study. After a month, the untreated water saw its AOC drop by only 4%, but the Grander revitalized water, a 90% drop. That is a massive difference. The pinpoints had basically eaten the entire buffet, making the water microbiologically stable and pure without adding any chemicals. This was the first real measurable evidence that connected the phenomenon to a practical benefit. Okay, so that bacteria's story is pretty compelling, right? But it still doesn't explain the how. What's the underlying mechanism? Well, decades later, a totally different field of science started dropping some major clues, this time from the world of physics. So let's completely switch gears for a second. A whole separate line of research, one that wasn't even looking at Grander at first, began exploring the physical properties of water. and it offered a potential new explanation for all these effects people had been seeing for years. And this isn't some fringe idea we're talking about. This research is happening at credible institutions like WETSIS, the European Center of Excellence for Sustainable Water Technology. They have researchers looking into how even weak magnetic fields can influence the molecular structure of water. A key concept that comes out of this research is something called, and this is a mouthful, DOLOPS. In simple terms, think of them as these tiny pre-crystal clusters of ions that are just floating around in the water, and their formation can be nudged one way or the other by forces like magnetic fields. But here's the big question. How can a weak magnetic field possibly do anything significant? Well, that's where the Coley criterion comes in. It's a formula that basically shows it's not about how strong the magnetic field is, but how sharply that field changes. These strong gradients, even from a weak source, can have a real effect on those ion clusters, giving us a plausible theory for how these devices might work. All right, so we've got the microbiology, the pinpoints, and we've got a potential physical theory, magnetic fields. Now let's see how this all crashes together in a very recent real-world case study, one that really brings home an old idea. The terrain is everything. Picture this. It's 2023, and we're at Nafferton Wold Farms, a big free-range egg producer in the UK. They've got 32,000 hens, and they've got a huge problem. The birds are stressed, they're not healthy, and their water is full of nasty bacteria. Now, the numbers here are just jaw-dropping. Look at that top row from September 7th. That's the before. The water is teeming with bacteria. Now look at the second row. Just 11 days after they installed the Grander system, Pseudomonas, S. aureus, coliforms, E. coli, all down to 0. That's not a gradual improvement. That's like flipping a switch. And this wasn't just numbers on a lab report. You could literally see the difference in the birds. Before, they were loud, stressed, pecking at each other. The whole barn smelled awful. Just 11 days later, they were calmer, the smell had gone down, and they were actually happier and going outside to range like they're supposed to. And this brings us back to this really powerful old idea from Antoine Béchamp, a contemporary of Louis Pasteur. He argued, the microbe is nothing, the terrain is everything. The point isn't that microbes don't matter, but that the environment, the terrain, is what determines whether those microbes can cause trouble in the first place. Change the water, you change the outcome. So when you put it all together, you've got this naturalist's original vision, some very strange microbiology, cutting-edge physics, and real-world farm data that's hard to argue with. It all leads to this one big, fascinating question. Could the future of water treatment be less about what we strip out and kill, and more about what we restore?